David Letterman's hand froze mid-gesture. The cue card slipped from his fingers and hit the floor. Paul Schaefer stopped playing. The audience, 300 people who'd come to laugh, went completely silent. A production assistant was running toward the stage, holding something Letterman wasn't supposed to see. A letter, written 3 days before the Challenger exploded. Written by someone who would never come home. For 8 years, Letterman had made America laugh, with gap-toothed grins and Midwestern sarcasm. But what he was about to read, what he was about to do, would break him in front of 30 million people. And in the third row, a woman clutched a firefighter's helmet to her chest, waiting for her turn to speak. This was the night David Letterman stopped being a talk show host and became something else entirely. It was February 1986, cold in New York, colder in America's heart. 2 weeks had passed since the Challenger space shuttle exploded 73 seconds after liftoff. 7 astronauts gone in a fireball over the Atlantic Ocean. The entire nation watched it happen live on television. School children saw their teacher, Christa McAuliffe, disappear into smoke and fire. America was grieving, and David Letterman didn't know what to do with that. Late Night with David Letterman taped every weeknight at NBC's Studio 6A in Rockefeller Center. The show was a machine monologue, yes, comedy bit, band riffs, out by midnight. Letterman was 38 years old, at the peak of his power. Curly brown hair, boyish face, that famous gap-toothed grin. He was the king of irony, the master of the smirk. Nothing got except this. The show opened like always, the NBC Peacock logo, Paul Schaefer, and the band launching into the theme, the audience clapping on cue. But when Letterman walked out in his charcoal suit and burgundy tie, something was off. His smile didn't reach his eye. The monologue began the way they always did, jokes about Congress, the weather, the usual safe targets that never offended anyone. But something in the rhythm was off. The beats didn't land the way they should have. The audience laughed, but it wasn't the full-bodied, effortless laughter the studio was used. It sounded thin, almost unsure, like they were laughing out of habit rather than amusement. Even Paul Schaefer, usually the first to break into a grin at one of Letterman's throwaway lines, seemed unusually subdued behind his keyboard, his fingers resting on the keys instead of dancing over them. Letterman was halfway through a bit about rising coffee prices when he paused. Just stop. The words fell away mid-sentence. His gaze drifted toward stage right, where a young production assistant stood frozen in place, holding a manila envelope against her chest as if it were something dangerous. Her face had gone pale. Her hands trembled visibly under the light. Letterman's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Hold on," he said quietly, the tone shifting enough that the audience murmured in confusion. Paul Schaefer's hands hovered above the keyboard, waiting. Letterman walked to the edge of the stage. "What is it, Karen?" The production assistant, Karen, 24 years old, barely a year out of NYU, looked like she might fall apart at any moment. "Mr. Letterman, I'm so sorry. This just came. It's been sitting in the mailroom since last week. Nobody knew. What is it?" Letterman asked again, gentler this time. Karen swallowed hard and handed him the envelope. It was postmarked January 25th. 1986, 3 days before the Challenger launch. But it was the return address that made Letterman's breath hit. Kennedy Space Center, Florida. Crew quarters. The audience couldn't see the envelope, but they could see Letterman's face change, his entire demeanor shifting in an instant. The ironic shield he wore every night slipped away. The practiced Midwestern cool dissolved. He opened the envelope with a careful, almost reverent movement. Inside was a single sheet of NASA stationery, handwritten in blue ink. What Letterman read over the next 30 seconds would break something deep inside him. And what happened after, when a woman in the third row rose holding a firefighter's helmet, would redefine what late-night television was capable. Letterman's eyes moved across the page. Once, then again, his hand rose to his mouth. Paul Schaefer leaned forward, trying to see what was happening. The audience fell completely silent. "This is from Christa McAuliffe," Letterman said, voice barely above a whisper. "She wrote this 3 days before." He stopped. The sentence wouldn't come. He looked up, eyes red, shining. She says they were watching the show in crew quarters the night before the launch. All 7 of them." The silence in Studio 6A thick. Letterman's voice cracked. "She writes, 'Dear Mr. Letterman, we're watching your show in crew quarters tonight. You make us feel normal before the extraordinary. You remind us that life is supposed to be funny, even when we're about to do something terrifying. When we come back, can I be a guest? I'd love to tell my students I met the man who made their teacher laugh before she went to space.'" A sound swept the audience, a fragile mixture of gasp and sob. Letterman folded the letter with trembling hands. "She's not not coming back," he said. "None of them are." Paul Schaefer dropped his head and touched a single soft chord on the piano. Letterman stood holding the letter, and for the first time in 8 years of television, he didn't know what to do next. Then a figure rose from the audience. Third row, aisle seat, a woman in her early 40s in a simple black dress. Her dark hair was pulled back, her eyes red-rimmed, and she clutched something to her chest, a firefighter's helmet. "Mr. Letterman," she said, her voice small but steady. The cameras found her, then returned to Letterman. "Yes, ma'am. My name is Angela Torres. My husband was Michael Torres. He was a firefighter with Ladder Company 10. He died 3 weeks ago in a building collapse in the Bronx." The audience inhaled as one, an audible, collective heartbreak. Letterman stepped off the stage, and this time there wasn't even the faintest hint of doubt trailing behind him. His movements carried a sober determination, the kind of quiet resolve that comes over someone who realizes that, for one, the work they're doing isn't show business at all. It's something far older and far more human. The studio lights followed him down the step, turning his figure into a silhouette carved from grief and responsibility. The applause had died, replaced by a stillness that felt alive, a silence so complete that even the rustle of his shoes against the floor felt amplified. He still held the letter in his hand. The once flat sheet was now slightly softened from the warmth of his finger, edges bent from being clutched too tightly, as if letting go for even a second would break the fragile connection it represented. His grip was firm, but trembling, not from fear, but from a tidal wave of emotion pressing hard against his chest. Behind him, Paul Schaefer played a delicate, mournful sequence on the keyboard. The music didn't simply accompany the moment, it drifted into the air like a slow exhale, each note landing softly, gently, as though afraid to disturb what was happening down on the studio floor. It sounded like memory, like loss, like something that was trying to find its way to peace. When Letterman reached her, he stopped. He didn't stand with the posture of a performer or the timing of a host. Instead, he stood like a person who had walked straight into someone's heartbreak and knew enough to tread carefully. "I'm so sorry," he said, and his voice wasn't polished, wasn't controlled. It was simply honest. It cracked in place, softened in others, carrying the weight of someone who wished deeply that the world were different than it was. Angela lifted her gaze. Tears streamed freely, carving delicate trails down her cheek, collecting at her chin, before falling soundlessly onto her blouse. Her breath shook with every inhale. "Every Friday night for 8 years, she said, her voice thin but steadying itself. "We watched you together. It was our tradition. He'd come home from his shift, exhausted, sometimes covered in soot, and he'd say, 'Is Dave on yet?' And we'd sit on the couch and just laugh. You gave us that." Her voice cracked like a piece of glass catching too much pressure. She pressed her lips together but continued. "2 days before he died, he told me something. He said, 'If anything ever happens to me, I want Dave to have my helmet. Tell him he made my life bearable. Tell him he reminded me why I kept going back into burning buildings, because people like him make the world worth saving.'" And then she held out the helmet. Letterman looked at it with a mix of reverence and disbelief. It wasn't symbolic. It was real. A heavy, worn object filled with years of service, sweat, danger, and every fire the man had walked in. Its surface bore scars, blackened scorch mark, chipped edges, worn lettering. "Engine Company 10" stretched across the front, slightly faded but still proud. He took the helmet with both hands. The weight surprised, a deep, physical weight that made his arms tighten instinctively. He held it as if he feared dropping it would erase the man it belonged to. For several long seconds, he didn't speak, didn't move. He simply stared at it, letting the reality of what he was holding sink in. Then he looked back at Angela. "What was he like?" Letterman asked. His voice was barely audible, soft in a way that suggested he was asking more out of need than curiosity. "Funny," Angela said, and a small, trembling smile appeared. "He was so funny. He'd do impressions of you, the voice, the shrug, everything. Our daughter, she's 7. She thought her dad was the funniest man in the world." Letterman nodded slowly. "He was a hero," he said. Angela shook her head gently. "He was a fan. He just wanted you to know you mattered." And something inside Letterman shifted. The stage wasn't a stage anymore. The cameras weren't cameras. The audience wasn't an audience. It all fell away. What he did next violated every rule of late-night television. He turned toward the crowd, holding the letter in one hand and the helmet in the other. "We're not doing the show tonight," he said. "Not the way it's supposed to go." The control booth erupted in frantic movement. Hands waving, signals flashed, but Letterman didn't look up at them once. "Paul," he said quietly, "give me something gentle." Paul nodded and began playing a slow, heartfelt rendition. "America the Beautiful." The melody hovered in the air, soft and reverent, its familiar chords transformed by the emotional weight of the moment. Letterman sat down on the step at the front of the stage. He didn't choose the desk, the chairs, or any of the usual places that represented the structure of his show. He chose the step, the place where one sits when they're not performing. When they're just speaking as a person, the audience held their breath. I don't know what I'm doing, Letterman admitted, his voice stripped of performance. I make jokes for a living. I'm not good at this, but I'm holding a letter from a teacher who wanted to inspire kids. And I'm holding a helmet from a man who ran into fires to save strangers. And both of them watched this show. Both of them thought it mattered. He lifted his head and looked into the camera. Christa McAuliffe will never be a guest on this show, he said softly. Michael Torres will never watch another Friday night. But they were here. They matter. And if you've lost some, his throat tightened. He swallowed hard. If you've lost someone who made you laugh, or kept you safe, or just sat next to you on the couch on a Friday night, they mattered too. No cut, no commercial break, just Letterman, tears on his face, trying to keep breathing through the moment. Paul played on, tender, unobtrusive, almost like a heartbeat beneath the word. Eventually, Letterman rose again. He walked back to his desk with slow, heavy steps. He placed the helmet on one side, the letter on the other. Two sacred objects now, two embodiments of two different lives connected by a TV show no one ever imagined would hold this kind of grief. We're going to take a break, he said quietly. And when we come back, I want to hear from you. If you're here tonight because someone who's gone used to watch this show, I want to know their name. No one knew what that meant. Not the audience, not the producer, not even Letterman himself. When they returned from commercial, Letterman wasn't behind the desk. He stood in front of it, hands folded, the helmet and letter visible behind him like silent guardian. Okay, he said. Who wants to go first? A single hand rose from the back row. Slow, shake, an elderly man. He stood. My son was on the challenge, he said. Greg Jarvis, payload special. He loved your show. A ripple of shock moved through the audience. Letterman walked to the man without hesitation. What do you want people to know about Greg? He asked. That he was excited, the man said, tears gathering. That he called me the night before and said, Dad, I'm going to see the star. And he did. He's still up there. Letterman pulled him close and held him. No joke, no commentary. The next story came from a young woman. My brother was a firefighter. He died last. He and Michael Torres were friends. They watched your show at the firehouse. Another. My wife was a teacher. Like Christa. She died of cancer. She recorded your show every night in the hospital. One by one, people stood. Dozens of Letterman listened to every single one. He didn't interrupt. He didn't rush. He didn't act like time mattered, because in that moment, it didn't. Paul played softly beneath each story, letting the room breathe, letting grief have space. Then something remarkable happened. A firefighter, full dress uniform, polished shoes, white gloves, rose from the back. Mr. Letterman, he said, voice steady, I'm from Ladder 10, Michael Torres's company. We're all here tonight, 12 of us. We came to honor him. The camera turned to reveal an entire row of firefighters standing at attention, their posture rigid, their eyes bright, their grief visible. Letterman's face folded in on itself. He walked to them. He shook every single hand. Then he lifted the helmet high and said, this stays with me. I'll remember. The men saluted. No applause. Just breathless, aching silence. A room full of people witnessing something sacred. As the show neared its end, Letterman returned to his desk one final time. He placed the helmet and the letter side by side, turning them slightly so the camera could see them clearly. Before we go, he said, I want to read you the last line of Christa's letter. He picked it up, his hands steady at last. She wrote, Mr. Letterman, thank you for reminding us that even heroes need to laugh. See you when I get back. He set the letter down gently, as if it might shatter. Christa McAuliffe, Greg Jarvis, Michael Torres, they're not coming back, he said, but they're not forgotten. He looked into the camera, into living rooms across America. If you're watching at home, and you've lost someone, write down their name. Say it out loud. Tell their story. Because that's how they stay alive. Not in space, not in fire, but in us. In the stories we tell. Paul Schaefer played the closing theme slow, reverent, full of weight. The credits rolled over a still image. Letterman at his desk, head bowed, hands resting on a helmet and a letter. No joke, no guess, just witness. The next morning, NBC received over 15,000 letters, photographs of loved ones, stories of teachers, firefighter, astronaut, parents, children. The network didn't know how to sort them, where to store them, what to make of the deluge, but Letterman did. He had them archived, and he wrote back personally to every Challenger family. Michael Torres's helmet stayed on a shelf in Letterman's office until the day he retired, next to Christa McAuliffe's framed letter. He never talked about them on air again, but visitors who entered his office always noticed. Years later, Angela and her daughter, now grown, returned to the show. The daughter said, You gave my mom permission to grieve. You made my dad's death mean something. When Letterman retired in 2015, 2013, he was asked what his most important moment on television was. He didn't mention celebrities' joke, rating, or award. He mentioned February 1986, a letter, a helmet, a night when comedy stepped aside and humanity took its place. "That's when I learned," Letterman said, "that the most powerful thing you can do with a platform isn't to make people laugh. It's to make them feel less alone." Christa McAuliffe never sat on his couch. Michael Torres never made it to another Friday night. Greg Jarvis never returned from the start. But their names were spoken, their stories were told, their humanity preserved, and that became his legacy.